We're very excited to have you here. Tonight our panel presentation is Post-Racial, Fact or Fiction, the Millennials Speak. We have an august panel of 5 young people, and I'm really interested to hear what they have to say. I remember being this age and having the most wonderful conversations, probably some of the best of my life, because you have the freedom to be philosophical without the burden of experience. So,
so true.
And everything's possible at that age. So I'm really looking forward to this. McMenamins would like to welcome you. We are indebted to McMenamins. They are one of our first funders of Race Talks. So I will do this now because it's only going to be briefly. I was working with Reverend Renee Ward on a cancer awareness thing. This month is cancer awareness, and so in order to acknowledge cancer awareness, I shaved my hair. And so the scarf is going back on real quick because this is cold. So I don't know how bald men do it. You have my, I couldn't do it. I just have to wear a wig, I'm sorry. But anyway, we will be putting together a calendar toward the end of the year. It's called Bald is Beautiful and Bodacious in honor of women and men, because some of you might know Obo Adi. He's a musician here in town, and he recently just recovered from breast cancer. So men get it too. So I'm putting in this plug, so men, please get checked. Please get checked, and check yourself, because you never know at what time you will be stricken. So I will go back to the rag in a minute. We have a wonderful panel today, and for those of you who don't know, millennials are young people 31 and under. I think the group in front of them were called Gen X. And the last group I knew about was baby boomers, and I'm 62 and I'm a boomer, so I know there was somebody in between, but I don't know what you call them. But I think there was ex-Jenners or something. Well, I don't know. Somebody was in there. Our first person in the lineup is Jaime Guzman Limon, and I have a special place in my heart for Jaime because I was his younger brother's teacher. He's active in Northwest Immigrant Youth Alliance and the Student Alliance Project, which produced the film Papers, Stories of Undocumented Youth, which has now been screened in all 50 states. You mean I was in the movie? You mean I'm all over the United States? Oh my gosh, that's exciting. Not that anybody knows me. Somebody said, were you in the movie? I didn't know. I said I was the bald-headed black woman. There was only 4 black people in the movie. You couldn't have missed me. So, although I was in there that quick, so don't worry about it. Thank you, Jaime. Our next speaker is Hannah Echo. Hannah is an active duty officer in the U.S. Coast Guard, which is a mouthful because these are rocky waters out here right now. So thank you very much, Hannah. Our next panelist is Nathan Holst, who works primarily at Sisters of the Roads, is also a musician, anti-racist, youth director, and lover of the outdoors. And he's also been known at times to be silly. Gee, that goes along with the rest of us, so thank you, Nathan. Our last speaker is Yaziel Ormeno. She is an MBA, born and raised in Peru, came to the U.S. at the age of 13 to escape terrorism. Thank you. Our first question is, what did you learn about race or racism from your parents and older generations? And what do you want the next generation to learn from you?
Now, regarding this question, what did I learn about race and racism about my grandparents, my parents? I came to the United States. I'm from Mexico City, one of the biggest cities in the world. Now, what I learned about race and racism, I come from indigenous roots. Fortunately, my grandparents didn't really speak that much about their indigenous roots. They also migrated from different villages outside Mexico, but never really talked to us about that. But our parents always told us about love and care for other people. And however, though, I did notice certain stuff that was happening, such as the racism against gay and lesbians in Mexico. The only thing that I heard, and part of that it was because of through the religion part. In Mexico, there's a lot of Catholicism. There was always that crash between the whole homophobia and whatnot. Still recently, I still talk with my dad about this issue about the whole homophobia and this and whatnot. But one of the things that I learned from my parents, and it was about treat others the way you want to get treated. However, though, there was always that, growing up in Mexico City, where a lot of people migrate from outside, there was all this stereotypes, there's all this hate towards indigenous community, which it was hard for me to understand that, just because I went to school over there, and many of my friends were immigrants themselves within, they came from other areas from Mexico. The way they talked, my dad didn't talk too much about racism, other than don't bully others, but if you get hit back. That was what my dad used to tell me. My mom, on the other side, she was more of the whole thing about respect women, also respect people. Don't matter where they come from, help them out, be there for people, because we might get migrated back and forth from Mexico to the United States. My parents went through some discrimination themselves in California, so it was, going back to Mexico, or even now we moved back to Oregon. It was always about remember that remember where you came from. Don't forget that yourself you're an immigrant. Yourself, you come from indigenous roots, and I started realizing that also, how we don't, with growing up, we didn't really talk that much about our indigenous roots. So it's been quite interesting lately, understanding, acknowledging those roots of myself, and now before I present myself as Mexican, I also present myself as I'm from have blood and indigenous roots from Oaxaca, and that's partly what my grandparents never really talked that much about them migrating to Mexico City and how they were discriminated. It was actually recently that I learned the actual story of how my grandpa came from a small town to Mexico City, and how he was discriminated, and how he made his way up in terms of being more financially stable, talking, understanding even Spanish, talking more Spanish. So it was recently that really understood, for the first time I heard his story. So I'm still learning a lot about the whole issue about racism and race through with my parents, especially because now there's been more of an open dialogue with them. Before, like I said, it was mostly about we roll with the punches, we learn as we go. But part of it, and I believe one of the questions here is going to be talking about media and how that has affected, and how those conversations have been at home and around the environment that I grew up. So I'll hand it over to someone else.
So what I learned about racism from my parents and older generation. So I'm first generation African American. So meaning my parents came over from Nigeria and have been here for about 20 years. And I was actually born in the UK and came over here when I was 4 years old. So I used to have a little cute British accent and everything, but obviously it's gone now. So when growing up, what I learned about racism was that my parents definitely mentioned it. We saw it from, both my dad was basically an entrepreneur. He had his own business, and he definitely talked about his struggles of just being black in that kind of arena, and the things that he was going through. And only recently now am I just really, my eyes have been opened up to just so many more of the struggles that he had to go through, just when he didn't even have a business, and he was going from town to town and going to different places in Texas, and people turning on the vacancy, or no vacancy lights when he would show up and things like that. I also learned about the racism that we also face from people who look like us, meaning like Black Americans, because both of my parents have very strong accents. So that wasn't really a racism, and I always am loath to bring that up because it's definitely used against people of color when we talk about racism that we definitely direct against each other. And growing up, what I learned about racism from older generations was, because even though I am obviously first generation African American, I grew up in this country, you know, and I'm a nationalized citizen. Obviously, I'm in a military service now. And so I grew up in this climate of how America treats Black Americans. And that's obviously a different way than they treat people who just emigrated from Africa. And with that, I learned about the just struggle that Black Americans have had to put up with, that still put up with, obviously, you know, that's still going on, about how much they've endured and how much they're still not respected in today's age. And recently I had a kind of, definitely a big shift in just how I see racism really everywhere. And it hurts because, I mean, it's like almost hard to even go outside, really. What I want the next generation to learn from my generation about racism is that it's still here. You know, I don't want anyone to get fooled because we have a Black president that all of a sudden racism decided to just take a nap, you know, and go away for a while. That's not the case. So I want them to know that you still have to fight in some ways. I want them to know that, you know, we have made progress in a lot of ways, and that's something that we definitely should be proud of and something that we should talk about, the positive, but don't get fooled into thinking that everything's gone and that you can rest now. And I just want, especially people of color, not to internalize the racism that's constantly thrown to them, because even talking to younger children now, I still hear so many of the same messages that I grew up with in this country, and it really makes me sad, because I think, wow, you know, if people want to talk about post-racial America, like, look at these ideas that these kids still have about their skin color, about their hair, about the shape of their nose, about their last names, and things that they're still ashamed of in 2011, and how they're still shoved to the side. So I want them to know that they have everything to be proud of, and I want people to know that we have to still keep on going.
My name again is Giselle Armino, and I came to the United States when I was 13 years old. Living in Peru was very different than living here. My dad is a physician for the Peruvian military, and he became a target because of the terrorism problem in Peru in the 1980s. So because of that, we had to leave our country, and the privileges that we had as, you know, as being part of that socioeconomic status that he belonged to in Peru. When we came to the US, things were a little different. My dad didn't speak English, none of us spoke English, and he had to have menial jobs, and, you know, you had a physician doing janitorial work, and you know, people would look down on him, and you know, I don't think that it was necessarily because he was Peruvian that people looked down on him, but just people were a little ignorant. What I learned about racism growing up in Peru, race and actual racial differences and any other kind of difference wasn't really brought up in my family. My parents didn't speak to me about judging somebody based on the color of their skin or their religious creed or their sexual orientation or the language they spoke. In Peru, you speak Spanish, you can also speak Quechua and Aymara, which are two dialects of actually languages, excuse me. So it didn't matter what language you spoke or how well you spoke Spanish or if you could speak other languages or, you know, if you were darker or lighter or if you were, you know, Asian or you were purple, yellow, orange, brown, didn't matter. You were measured based on your education and the manners that you had and the way that you respected other people. Racism, the way that it is viewed in this country, became blatant to me and my family when we came here. And you know, this idea of being judged because of how you looked or how you spoke, it wasn't something that we were used to. We were always used to, you know, you educate yourself, you go get a degree, you do the things that you need to do, you work hard, and you're going to be successful. My parents never inculcated in us to see ourselves as a minority because of the color of our skin or because we couldn't speak English. My parents always inculcated that if you work hard and you do the things that you need to be doing, then there is no reason why anybody would put you down. And how somebody else sees you isn't necessarily how you see yourself. It is how you believe in yourself and the things that you do to better yourself that are going to matter. What I'd like to teach my children is the exact same thing. My children, as many of us in this room, are not going to be a pure race. My husband is Caucasian, and I'm not. So he has a completely different culture altogether than me. Sometimes we eat different things. Sometimes what I cook he might not like. Sometimes what he cooks I might not like. You know, we speak differently about things. We have difference in opinions of things, and we welcome those differences. And really, at the end of the day, we're all really the same. We eat, we sleep, we want to study, we want to better ourselves. We just want better lives. And so I want my children to understand that you cannot base judgment on people because of how they look or how they speak or the things that they believe, but rather you have to be able to understand and learn from that so that you can see how really very similar you are to that person. My parents always taught us that racist people are simply uneducated people that haven't had an opportunity to see the world through your eyes. So it is my job to teach that person of the differences that there are and how those differences really make you very similar to theirs. Thank you.
All right, I also did some writing first because I also get nervous and I'm not great at speaking in the moment. But I might try to add a couple things to what I have here too, because I think my experience will be fairly similar to Caitlin's. But I'll tell my story as well. The primary thing that I learned about growing up about race is that it's important to treat everyone the same, that we are all equal. Another way to say that is that the best way to deal with racism is by being colorblind. I've heard that a lot actually in Portland, especially white folks talking about that. So for me, though, we lived in a predominantly white city, and especially a white part of town, and I grew up in Minnesota, where we have Minnesota Nice. My parents were glad that we lived next door to a family who had adopted a girl of color from Colombia. We also had a number of visitors from Namibia through our church, and my parents would explain that though some people were treated badly because of the color of their skin, it was important for us to treat them as everyone else, to treat them with respect. So like I think Caitlin was saying as well, I think a lot of, especially young white folks, are taught that same thing, that racism is about individual actions. So treat everyone the same and there won't be racism. That were the messages that I got, I think. Talking about what I'd say the next generation, though I see the good intention of my parents and their generation of teaching colorblindness, I also see it as unhelpful. Precisely just because of what Caitlin was talking about, is that when we do that, it allows the racism to happen in institutions and to continue with many of us, and again I would say especially white folks, thinking that racism isn't happening. If we're saying we're colorblind, it still exists, and we're sort of thinking that it doesn't, and it keeps going. So what I would teach the next generation is, especially teaching white youth, is that racism exists, and it's not just about individual actions, but it's a part of every institution. I would teach them that we need to talk about that and have enough humility to especially listen to folks most affected by racism and to work to change those systems. One thing I would also add, and something that Jaceel said that sparked in my head too, is that I would also teach them that we are all the same in the sense that that we are all human, and that connects us. But that I would also teach them that we have different identities based on who we are in society, and that's also an important part of our lives.
I didn't share this with our speakers, but I guess I was a rebel before my time. I was married to a white Jewish guy. And my daughter is a little bit older than all of you. She has a nice Jewish last name and first name, and then she looks Hispanic. So it never occurred to me to be frightened or to think of those things. And my parents, like their parents, said, you know, everyone's created the same until I married that white guy. And his parents had said the same thing, and then all of a sudden, it was a little bit different when it was home and personal. So, and we did end up getting a divorce, and it had nothing to do with race. And I love it when I've talked about, you know how the girls get together and you're like, and it's the man talk thing. And I'd talk about him, and then at some point I would say something like, yeah, and he was, and that white so-and-so, and they go, he was white? I thought he was black, the way you sounded. And I said, they're all the same. There's only two kind of people, and derivations thereof, you know, men and women. And so, you know, I think the best thing we can do for our kids is be honest about this. To tell them honestly so that they don't have such a rude awakening when they grow up and find out that the world is not the way we said. And then they're going to start wondering, why did we lie to them? We need to think about that. We need to come up with a good way to do it, though. Our second question is, what has been your experience of racism in the institutions in your life? School, work, faith, and social communities.
So to this next question. Yeah, experience of racism. So for me, unsurprisingly from what I talked about before, I didn't really see racism growing up, which to me is part of what it means to grow up white. Most people I knew were not overtly racist, so to me it didn't exist. And it was only in college when I went to Chicago for an urban studies program for a semester that I really started seeing racism. And that was a pretty big wake-up call. That's sort of that institutional. And there were people that would make racist jokes that I would see that as well. But that was a pretty big change for me. And it's taken me many years to still recognize it when it happens, and I often still miss it. I also wanted to answer this question from a white perspective of how am I affected by racism. I see that inhabiting for me in a number of ways. One primary thing that I see is that racism encourages me as a white person to lose a healthy sense of cultural identity. Still remains a challenge for me to articulate what I like about being white. And I often do feel guilt and shame about my whiteness, and I think it's because of racism that I feel this. So for me, one of my motivations around working for racial justice is that I have a better understanding of myself and my own identity, allowing me to feel some sense of pride in who I am, like reclaiming my identity around my Swedish heritage. And then also related to my cultural identity, I also see racism preventing me from really being fully myself. I think it especially clouds my judgment and my emotional life. So when I'm working deeply with racism, which to me also means engaging lots of other different kinds of oppressions as well, I begin to get a clearer sense of myself. And I feel more connected to myself and others, which leads me to the last part of how I feel racism affects me, which is also my relationship to folks of color. Because of the racist systems and all I've taken in from it, I find myself almost always, at least on some level, uncomfortable when I'm around folks of color. And though I think a certain sense of discomfort can be a good thing and it can be a learning thing, I often see racism affecting how much I can trust, especially folks of color, or they can trust me, and I lose opportunities for deeper connection. So for me, engaging racism in a multicultural context is a start of repairing relationships that have been lost because of that racism.
My experiences in various circles growing up with racism was that I was very aware of it, even at a young age, but it was tough because whenever I bring it up, people would tell me kind of like I was crazy, or I was overly sensitive. Like when I was really young, just noticing even the comments that teachers would make, and maybe they were innocent to them, like just saying, "Oh my God, look at those blue eyes, you're adorable." And then I was like, well, how come you don't tell us, like, we have pretty eyes, or all the Mexican kids, we have pretty eyes, and Hannah, I got something like that, or just how shut to the side I felt like a lot of history was, just having like, a week period about slavery, or about, any of the Mexican revolutionaries. You cover that in 2 days, but you spend like 3 months in the Civil War as a 4th grader. I mean, these kind of things I noticed as a kid, but I always felt definitely like people would always brush aside when I would notice these instances of racism. And as I got older, I started noticing it more, but I definitely started keeping it to myself, because I felt that, okay, obviously I'm the crazy one, I'm the weird one, I'm the one that's not sticking to the plan, who actually sees racism every time I go to class, or every time I go out in public, by the way people treat my mom, or the way that people are laughing at my friend's accent. Obviously I'm the nutcase. And so it really became something that almost made me, I started noticing a really big time was when I went to the schools I went to. Not so much when I was at the prep school of Caitlin and New Mexico, but when I was at the military school I went to in New York. And at that school, just to give you a couple of ideas and numbers, out of a class of 200, there were 2 black girls in the entire class, and there were 20 women total out of a class of 200. So that's like basically how it looks on all levels. And so not only was I noticing the constant just joking racism, is what I would call it. It's like, oh, don't take it so hard, we're not being that serious, it's just a joke. In South Park, they make fun of everybody. But I think it's a big difference if I've been made fun of for 500 years and now you're getting your 2 years of being made fun of. And I didn't have those arguments ready, so again, like I kept quiet and I kept quiet. And now when I came to Portland, and I came out of this like very conservative military environment, and I was like, okay, got my dream sheet to get into the Coast Guard, what units am I gonna pick? And they have some places in like the South, and I was like, I don't know about that. I don't want to jump into that too quickly from where I was at. And I saw, okay, Seattle, Portland, these are very liberal places, and these people look like they're fun, and they have great concerts. This would be the place for me. So, I put Seattle and Portland as my top 2 choices, and I got Portland. And at first I was kind of disappointed about it, but I was recently reading a note that we had to write ourselves from one of these dialogues about 6 months ago, and that's what actually brought me to this work, because I honestly have gotten physically sick from the racism that I've seen in this city, and I don't know sometimes how people put up with it. And just dealing with that, at work, and then coming to this city and people treating people so like they're not human, and how people don't even notice that, and how it's become common practice in this world. I don't know how people don't walk around with broken hearts every day, just think how people are treated on account of this superficial thing. And I know we can all stand here, and we all are people, and we all have more genetically in common, outside of different races than actually within our social groups, but this stuff is still going on. And just seeing how, constantly, and I know Portland, they are a white city, so I guess maybe some people feel like they don't have that responsibility, they don't have to showcase the different people here. But I feel like we do, because these people are human, and these things are still happening in this city. I mentor a little girl on the fact that she lives in one of the greenest places in America, but she hasn't gone camping. She hasn't done these same things that these little kids are doing. I see these programs that are not going after the communities that really need them, that really need to take advantage of this. And then we call it, oh, okay, well, we're just serving the greater good. So that's my experience with racism, and it's definitely been constant.
Got a lot to talk about. We'll start off with actually one story. Aside from organizing, aside from working with youth, I also wait tables. I wait tables for a couple of years at a pretty wide area, conservative, but then moved to another area out to Gresham, where I was waiting tables. And many of the other waiters are white, Actually, the only Hispanic, only Latino working as a waiter there. Well, it was interesting. I get there, start my shift. Suddenly, this kid comes up to me. He's like, "Look, Jaime, almost dark as you are." And I'm like, "Hold on, do I look like a tan meter to you? Do I look like a tan meter?" He's like, "Oh no, I don't mean it like that." "Oh, well, yes, you do. I mean, you're not trying to be brown. All you're trying to do is just be bronze. That's what you're trying to be." So, and that's the thing that it kind of gets to me, because it was like you don't mean it, but then in reality, you know, it's like, that to me, that was when it's like, okay, that's not right, you know. I mean, that's one of the many experiences I have had. You know, I grew up, like I say, I grew up in Mexico City, where I saw a lot of discrimination even among my community. But you know, I'm gonna speak mostly about moving to Portland. I came to Portland about 14 years ago, migrated here, and I started noticing the discrimination and racism at the school when I knew the basic English, but yet I was kept in ESL classes, and I started noticing how I wasn't even learning the right education. I came to the United States when I was in 7th grade, and I was learning 3rd grader math just because I was not fluent in whatever they call fluent in English. I knew how to communicate with people. Yes, it was a challenge. I'm not going to disagree, but you know, to me, it was like a way to keep me in this group of people. I felt so uncomfortable because I knew I had more potential, but yet because I couldn't pass this test, they kept me in this class. As I grew up and I started noticing that these classes also in a way they discriminate a group of people just because you have a last name that sounds Latino or sounds immigrant, whatever they want to call it, immigrant. You get testing and asked to apply tested for ESL classes. And that's when I also started noticing a lot more. I mean, my daughter, you know, I have a daughter now. As soon as she goes to school, she's going to be asked to take a test for ESL classes. To me, that feels like, in a way, discrimination to institutional racism continue to be part of that. That's one of the many stories. You know, I was the first one in my family to actually play football. I was a sophomore. And that's another place where I saw a lot of racism. You know, I was the only Latino playing football. I was, you know, 5'4", 130 pounds. You know, and I went up to my coach. I'm like, "Coach, I want to play. I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to play." "All right, well, let's see. Go over there." I didn't even know where I was going. I'm like, "All right, let's go." I found out I was trying out for alignment, and I'm like, you know, I was like, "All right, okay, I'm good with it. I'll keep trying." Well, I did the right thing. I went to school. I tried the hardest. You know, at home I wasn't getting much support because you know, it was something new to my family. But then I started noticing that I was talking to my coach. I'm like, I want to play more. I'm giving it all. And I started noticing how he treated me and talked to me a lot different. And he was also a history teacher. And a couple of my friends had him as a teacher. And they were telling me how he acted towards them. So I started, you know, putting the puzzles together and started seeing like certain behaviors he did and had towards us, the Latino community. And that's when I really felt discriminated, not just based on my ethnicity, but based on my body itself, being small, being, you know, not understanding, you know, so much the plays, but yet, you know, I started seeing other students that were doing bad, not doing the right thing, and still were playing, you know, full time, being part of the starting line. And so that's one thing. But actually now talking the more broader picture, you know, I see a lot of racism through even within my community, through having an accent, through being even undocumented. Being undocumented, that's another way you see a lot of racism. Myself, like, you know, many youth in this country are also undocumented. We just don't see discrimination among the whole aspect of race, color, tension, but also when it comes to jobs. There's a lot of as soon as there's another way to captivate us in this fear. When you're undocumented, you have a tendency to stay in the shadows and not being able to speak up against any type of discrimination, because automatically you get told like, oh, we're gonna call immigration, we're gonna call ICE, which unfortunately that's the way to keep this fear within our community. Another way that I've seen discrimination in my life is trying to pursue higher education. Being undocumented, trying to pursue higher education here in the I'll go back to what her name was, Hannah was mentioning, like how Portland gets called as more liberal or more immigrant friendly. Well, if we are, then why don't we even have in-state tuition for undocumented immigrants? Myself, I gotta pay out-of-state tuition, yet when I'm paying taxes, yet when I'm working and when I'm providing for the economy of this country, I don't get to pay in-state tuition. Well, that's one thing. Another thing is that I don't get a chance to have a driver's license. And they use the excuse of national security to take away driver's license and also to protect child support and whatnot. But yet, I don't get a chance to go and apply for a driver's license. Many of my community are forced to drive without a driver's license. That's another way that I see discrimination within that. We also have a law implemented called secure communities, which is actually unsecure communities that focus on looking for criminals that have drug charges, murder. Yet a large number of a percentage of the people that are getting deported are people that just had a traffic violation, really minor things. So there's that's another step that I see how discrimination plays in the role, and how certain corporations and certain politicians put money into this to try to pass these laws to keep on deporting this community. And I guess good. All right, so I'll pass on, but thank you.
Okay, so where have I experienced racism in institutions in my life? And well, I can say that I've experienced hatred and racism and discrimination from people of my own race and people of my own background. We came to the United States, like I said before, because of terrorism. Our home was bombed twice, one of which I remember. There was a kidnap attempt on both my sister and I, and my father, and I guess the last straw was my father was coming out of the bank, and there was a car bomb that was detonated. I don't know how to say that word, sorry. Anyway, but so to me it's very difficult to hear people talk about racism as a unidirectional thing, that it's only the white people against everybody else, or there's this one group of people against everybody else, because that hasn't been my experience. I've seen hatred, and I've seen bad things coming from people of my own background. When I came to the United States, I couldn't speak a word of English, not a word. So I was in ESL classes. Within 6 months, I worked my hardest, and I ended up in honor classes. And I couldn't really speak English, and I would sit there and I'd literally translate the entire book so that I could do my courses. But as my parents taught me, it is the hard work that you put into your education that is going to eventually pay off. My husband's Caucasian, and a lot of times when we go places, we get stared at. The interesting thing to me is that when we are being stared at, it isn't by white people staring at us because he's with a brown girl. A lot of times it's the Latin people that stare at us because I'm with a white man. We've been at restaurants where people have blatantly approached me and asked me, why am I not married to a brown man? Why would that matter? I'm not married to a color of his skin, I'm married to the person that he is. And it's very obvious that there is racism with Caucasian Americans towards other people. I'm not saying that there's not. I'm just saying that racism happens across the board. My husband goes places and he has a much more difficult time finding jobs. I have, knock on wood, never been unemployed. I have a very easy time finding jobs, and I'd like to think it's because of the skill set that I bring to an organization and not because of a demographic goal that they're trying to meet for the corporation. I'd like to think that it's because of my education and the skills that I'm bringing in. My husband was unfortunately unemployed for a year before, right after college. He had a really hard time finding a job, and he went to the same school, graduated from UC Davis, and he had a great education. He had a good rap sheet to go with him, and he couldn't find a job. He just could not find a job. I was the director of events for San Diego House of Peru with the Balboa Park. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of that organization, but it promotes different cultural events from different cultures. My husband was never really invited to these events because he was not Peruvian enough, or he wasn't, cool enough to know about the jokes or understand what we were talking about, or didn't eat the things that we eat in Peru. And so it was very difficult for us to be able to bring him along because people would just look at him inappropriately or make him feel bad. He currently goes to school now, and it was interesting to hear that he has a multicultural day at school. And so there was organizations that promoted cultures, Latins, we assume Latins means Mexicans, although there are several other countries in Latin America that we might not hear about. And so they have the Latin, quote unquote Mexican events, and they have, the African American events. And so I said, well, why don't you have an organization where you promote your cultural differences in, being German and being Swiss and those things? And he's like, we can't do that. He's like, do you have any idea what would happen if a bunch of white people got together and formed an organization at school? We would just be racist then. That would not be okay. Why would that not be okay? If we, as a person of color, are allowed to organize ourselves and are allowed to speak freely about our differences or our cultural background, why can't people of Caucasian background do the same? We talk about the white privilege. I worked as a community-based service counselor for a long time, and I can guarantee you that many of my clients of Caucasian descent have no idea what this white privilege is about because they never, ever experienced it. They had really bad lives, and they had suffered a lot, and they had, problems with drug addiction, and they had problems finding jobs, and they had problems with finding educational resources. So I think that they would have a hard time hearing about this white privilege. We talk about, these are terms that I've heard, reverse racism. Racism is just racism. It is just what it is. Racism against white people, racism against brown people, orange people, purple people, it doesn't matter. So I have a hard time with those two terms. I remember, this is a funny story actually, but I remember when I was in high school, like I said, I couldn't speak English, so my ESL teacher actually helped me write my essay to apply to school for college. So I got my application done, and I turned in my application. And it was just really an expectation in our family. It wasn't something that, I wasn't reinventing the wheel, or I wasn't coming up with, any Nobel Prize winning anything. It was just, you go to school, that's what you do. So I remember when I got accepted to UC Davis, my Spanish teacher, he was of Latin descent. He was so proud that I was the only Latin person in the ESL class that had been accepted to a 4-year university, that he made it so that I would have talks with kids about how important education was and how it was certainly an attainable thing, and I felt really good about myself, because I'm going to college. I'm the first Latin person that I was going to college in that school. I'm awesome. So I got home and I'm telling my dad how awesome I am. He didn't think so. He was like, well, what else are you going to do? What else are you expected to do? You are going to go to school. That's what you do. It's not, it's good that you're going to school, but it isn't this big, great thing. And so his big thing with what he tried to make sure that I understood it wasn't that he wasn't playing down on my achievement, but my achievement was not because of my race. My achievement was because of my hard work. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Our last question is, what is your opinion of how race is portrayed in the media? And I'm going to ask each of you to take 2 minutes to do that.
Another one of my favorite questions. Media, oh my God, I think media plays a big role in racism. I mean, social media. I use a great example, and I use an example with my Latino youth, is that the term Chicano or Chicana has been put into such corporation making money of that if you type in Google Chicano or Chicana, or if you type in Latino or Latina, the first thing you come across, Chicano or Chicana, is Chicano rap. About bullets, about how hard it is to live in the ghetto, and Chicano, Chicana art is just about lowriders and cars. But doesn't really explain what really Chicano, Chicana comes about. How it was a political movement, how it was a youth movement, how it was such a movement about improving your community. When it comes to Latina, when you type in Latina, the first thing you see is a sexy Latina. That's what it turns about. You know, that's how this youth see taking Latino or Latina, and it's like, it's not about that, you know? And understanding how, you know, the term Hispanic comes from. Also, looking at media, I talk about both media here in the US and about media in Mexico. I'll start with like Mexico. The only thing you see is nothing different in media here. You definitely see, you know, when you see media, you see, how many of you guys know about Univision? You know, you watch Univision, you only see, you know, the tall, blue eye, you know, light skin, you know, blonde hair. And unfortunately, the people you see with brown skin are the ones that are working those hard works. I mean, that's the only thing you really see. Also, another thing that I bring up is in the Hispanic media is that when they show a gay or mostly gay, they don't usually show lesbian, but usually gay men show up as a comedian, as a joke, you know. So that's why, to me, like, that really plays a lot of role on how the society in my country kind of sets that tone. Here in the U.S., you know, I don't see nothing different, really. I see, you know, the news anchor being also, you know, light skin, the women. Actually, I was hearing that there are actually a lot of men watch Hispanic news because of the women that are there, just talking about that. But also, media, I think, it really plays a big role in how our youth think about themselves, treat themselves, and also it's just it's really a big factor in how the youth get to see other cultures, and really get to see how we humanize people, and really you know, set those labels. You know, so I guess I'll pass it on now.
I think the media is definitely something that's very important, because if there's anything that the millennials are known for, is that we are obsessed with our media, whether it's blogs, our TV shows, our movies. I mean, that's like, you know, it's attached to our hip. It's like with us all the time. So for anyone to write off like the media not being a form that is away from racism or doesn't deserve to be examined for its racism should be kind of crazy. You know, because it's a picture that we see of ourselves. We all know that people don't read books anymore. You know, they watch a TV. Like, that's the world we live in today. And me and my sister always have a joke that, you know, if I believed what was on the TV or movies, like, we should hate ourselves. Like, I should walk around being like, I am the ugliest, weirdest, just oddest person in the entire world because of what the media throws back at me for what I'm supposed to be. And I believe that the media, I mean, it's almost scary about the images are still being played in 2011, that you have a show. I mean, even though Friends is over, like Caitlin was saying, How I Met Your Mother, Friends was set in New York City. I think they had 1 or 2 black characters in the whole, like, the series that were featured. I mean, that's utterly ridiculous, you know, or just how we still are parading the same kind of tropes over and over. And the problem with that is when people see those images, that's what makes sense in their head. That's how they're supposed to act. And it's not only a detriment to, you know, white people, it's a detriment to these usually like impressionable kids of color who think, well, you know, if I like art or if I like this, I must be kind of odd. So, you know, let me just kind of enter into the minstrel show. Let me just do this and do that, because obviously I'm not supposed to talk like how I talk or be like how I am. I think that's why we really have to parade the media for the images that they're spitting out to us. Because we're not, even though they have more power than we do have a bit of power to change things.
Cool, I'll make this quick so we can get to some other good stuff too. Let's see, so I think it's really, just to echo, really important to pay attention to what we see, what we take in. Give ourselves little homework assignments. I try to do that sometimes just to be aware of what's going on. Let's see, one thing that I think that I wanted to highlight was just who's racialized in the media. If a white person is involved in a media story, topic of race does not come up. They're just a normal individual making individual choices. But if a person of color happens to be part of the story, often their race is highlighted, which brings up a lot of stereotypes in our mind. And just wanted to give one example of that. One kind of blatant, possibly charged example of that was the comparison of Ted Kaczynski and Osama bin Laden. Both men were labeled as terrorists after they killed a large group of people. But there was no mention of Ted Kaczynski's whiteness or how we need to be afraid of white people now, whereas there continues to be a pretty huge surge of fears around Arabs in this country. So that's just one example.
Well, I would say that I would agree that television should be viewed as an entertainment, for entertainment purposes, and not necessarily as part of education. There has been a lot of stereotypes that are set in the way that things are portrayed, but I think that those stereotypes are also for all races, for all body types, for all likes and dislikes. So I feel that, in my opinion, there has been more people of color and Latin people and black people and Asian people and tall people, fat people, little people, all kinds of people that have come into TV more. And I think that there is a responsibility, if you are in the media, to be a role model, regardless of what you look like or how you, or what beliefs you have or how you speak. But unfortunately, I don't watch a lot of television. I spend a lot of time on Facebook, though. So, thank you.